On Thursday night, I had the blessing of being at the Stryker Center at Temple Emanu-El in Manhattan, where they did a live podcast of Dan Senor's Call Me Back, where he had his two most regular guests, Nadav Eyal and Amit Segal, in conversation about all of the things unfolding in Israel, and there is a lot unfolding. I know one person in this room who was there. Anyone else who was at that recording? Just one who I see. Okay. So I had a sermon prepared to share the Shabbat, but I'll be honest with you in that they started the session off, this podcast and this live taping, with a question that honestly has kept me up for the last 2 days. I thought it was one of the most genius, one of the most brilliant, one of the most thoughtful questions I have ever heard. And this is the question that they started with. It came from one of the viewers, and obviously they weed through them. And the question went equally to all three, Dan, Nadav, and Amit. Nadav and Amit are Israeli. One is a journalist on news. The other one is a journalist in print media. The question went as follows. 20 hostages were just released from black hole dungeons where they were kept for almost exactly 2 years. They were on a blackout from news and information about their families, about the world, and all that has happened. If they were to come out and you had to tell them what happened in the last 2 years, since October the 7th, what would you say? I think the question itself was genius. And I decided today to throw out the sermon that I had prepared. And I want to ask all of you that question. What would you say if Alon Ohel were here, or Elchana Bachbut, or so many others who came out, Evyatar David, whose mother stood on this bima, who cried, begging for her son to come home? And I'll be honest with you, I didn't think that that day would ever happen. But I've never been happier to be wrong. And she got to embrace her son. And now, many of them are being discharged from the hospital. They're going home. And if Eyal David, or Amit Segal, or you could sit them down and tell them in 2 sentences, in 1 paragraph, what happened in the last 2 years, what are you going to say? Any thoughts? I decided to make this interactive. Gary, stand up so people can hear you.
One sentence. A series of miracles.
Great answer. I don't know if I could disagree with that. A series of miracles, which I want to be clear on this. I happen to agree with that sentence. Evyatar David, who was in a dungeon for 2 years, might say, miracles? Really? I'm just pushing back. If someone went in the other direction, I could probably push back too. The people who ran the bomb shelters, those who lost children in war, miracles? Now, I'm not pushing back to inhibit you from sharing your thoughts. I applaud Gary, and I don't disagree with what he says, because if someone goes in the other direction, I'll have some fun that way too. But what would we say? Please, stand up. I know you're representing Davie, Florida, and you're doing it masterfully.
I said the world's upside down.
You would say the world is upside down. I think there's some truth to that. But this world sure did seem in order about a week and a half ago. And it sure did feel good about a week and a half ago. And all the little things that I was up at night over sure didn't care. But you're right. For a lot of it, it did seem that way. Yes. No, you had your hand up.
You were never forgotten.
What's your name? Edward. You gave me chills, because that's what I would have said too. And I get chills hearing it and hearing it again and thinking it. Edward said, you were never forgotten. And I think that, and I'm not picking on you, Edward, I think that that is not only a true statement, I think it's an understatement. That each and every one of them were thought about every single minute of the day. And people advocated tirelessly for their release. I think that's true. Anyone on this side of the room have anything to share? Marcy.
Balance of power and
Gold star for Marcy. In 2 years, the balance of power in the Middle East has radically shifted. Great answer. Marcy right? I think she's right. Carol Stoyer. Our values are askew. What seems important is a bit foggy. Good answer. Hard at times, and the operative word of that sentence is at times, to disagree. Michael Goodman, I saw your hand up. Stand up because I can barely hear you, and I imagine it's the same for others. I can't hear you. No, because we weren't on a blackout. The question was, if you weren't able to hear news for 2 years and someone came out of a dungeon, a tunnel that had no form of communication for 2 years, what would you tell them happened in those 2 years? That's the question. This congregation didn't have that, thank God. We know what's happened in those 2 years.
I would say AI's become so powerful, you have to be careful what's real.
Interesting. So you went in a very different direction that has little to do with their life, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. You said AI has become incredibly powerful, perhaps like all other things that become powerful, it could be used as a weapon or as a tool. Interestingly, in Gaza, they used AI and facial recognition in a serious way to help identify where many of the hostages were held.
I just think there's so much that happened within the 2 years. It would have to be broken up into categories to share what's been going on since they've been out of touch.
Perfect segue, Diana. Well, one more person, but I really wanted to end with Diana because that was a good segue for me. But go ahead, Stan. I'm glad you said it, Stan, because it's true. In our lifetime, for most of us, based on looking at your faces and ages, we've never seen anti-Semitism like this. And the truth is, most of us, not all of us, but most of us never imagined we would see anti-Semitism like this in our lifetime or in this country. Hilda, I could never skip you. Okay. Excellent. You all gave, every single one of you gave great answers. And the sociologist in me, and perhaps a little bit of the psychologist in me, would tell you that you really gave 2 sets of answers. One set of answers was about our world is swirling in a big negative cesspool of bad stuff. And if we don't stop it soon, it's going to get worse. And it's been a horrible, horrible time. And then a few of you, including Gary, including Joseph, Edward, that's why, Edward, and a few others, Marcy also, hinted at a time where things we never had dreamt of indeed happened. It reminds me of Dickens. If we were writing this book, we could say it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And I think all of you would be correct on that. Let's talk about what was horrible quickly for a minute. 3 days after October 7th and October 10th, when people started putting posters up of those who were missing, and we saw no goodniks, bad actors coming and ripping those posters down. People who were saying, it's a hoax, it's not true, or they're not deserving of our empathy. When people like Eviatar David and Emanu-El were taken from a Nova festival, a music concert, and held against their will, they were starved, they were tortured, that ripped away, to me, at some of the foundations of humanity. Because this wasn't just a small fringe group of people doing it. In fact, it became normalized and trafficked, and much like Stan said, it allowed the surfacing of a form of hatred and bigotry we thought we had long sent to bed. But what we learned is that anti-Semitism sleeps very lightly in this world. We also learned that Israel was put in a conundrum, a dilemma that it's been in before, but never with this amount of, I wouldn't say hatred or scrutiny, with this amount of what I'm going to call a pickle, a challenge before, which was, we can take care of the problem known as Hamas, or we can repatriate the hostages, and we're not talking about just a few, we're talking about 251 of them, but it's next to impossible to do both. And it was. That is a conundrum. Can anyone tell me a time when America had a conundrum like that? I can't remember a time. Can anyone tell me in their life when they had a conundrum like that? Now, I have much to say about Benjamin Netanyahu, I have much to say about the current government of Israel. This isn't the time for it. But I will tell you that it doesn't matter if Netanyahu is the prime minister, or Bennett's the prime minister, or Lapid is the prime minister, or Golda Meir or Ben-Gurion were the prime ministers, or even Levi Eshkol or Yitzhak Shamir. This is an unsolvable case. When you have to eradicate your enemy and forsake your hostages, or save your hostages but leave breath in the lungs of your enemy. It's an unheard of challenge. Besides the guerrilla warfare that is happening in the streets, besides dealing with an enemy that wears blue jeans and a button down and occasionally holds a Kalashnikov, and in holding it, they become an enemy and a combatant, and when they put it down, they become a civilian. And when that person is eradicated, they are registered as a civilian. And when a boy throws a bomb and that boy is 17 years old, and he is shot or killed from that bomb, it is logged as a child who has been killed, adding to those numbers. These are unsolvable dilemmas that the Jewish people in Israel has had to endure for this time. But there was also something pretty amazing that happened during these 2 years. Because on October 6th, the state of Israel was wildly divided over judicial reform, over the current administration, investigations into the prime minister. And literally on a dime, on October the 7th, the country reunited again. Granted, it was a horrible event that caused everyone to gather, but they were united and together that quickly, that fast. And there wasn't one person in the state of Israel, even those hard right-wingers who didn't want to release prisoners, not a one of them that didn't want the hostages back. The price tag might have been something that they would debate, but they didn't leave the mind of one soul. You couldn't land in the country and exit the airplane without seeing those hostages and knowing the toll it took on the country. When you put your passport in the machine that would give you your visa, you saw the pictures of those who were taken. And why? Because they wanted you to know you're coming to a country that is traumatized. And when you walked down that long ramp and you saw all the pictures of those who were taken, it was telling you, this is the reality. And it's true, Edward. There wasn't one soul in the country that wasn't up at night thinking about each and every one of those hostages, dead and alive, and how they deserve to be brought back home. And there's something to be said for that. There have been hostages taken in America, hostages taken by Iraqi forces, Afghani forces, Taliban forces. Does anyone here know the names of those hostages? But we know the names of the Israeli ones. We held places for them at our Shabbat table. We've had their families here on our bima. We've worn yellow ribbons for them, and we have created a space to say our hearts won't be full until they're back home. And I think that says something about our ethic, and it's an important ethic to be reminded of. The second piece that I would tell people that I think aligns with much of what you said, Marcy, and much of what you said, Gary, is if someone told me on October the 8th, this is a horrible event that happened in Israel, but I want you to know that Bashar al-Assad He's going to be on the run. He's going to leave Syria. And the people who are going to take over Syria are going to be in conversation about joining the Abraham Accords. And I want you to know that Hezbollah, who was our biggest threat, we were much more worried over Hezbollah than Hamas. They had amassed 200,000 rockets on the border, that they're going to be eliminated. And not just eliminated, they're going to be eliminated in a miraculous event where at one moment, 4,000 of their highest level fighters and generals will have their beepers explode. And then those that didn't have them explode the next day, their walkie-talkies that they used to communicate will explode in their face, taking them all out of commission, identifying who all of them are, going in and removing all of those rockets so that now they are left with an arsenal of about 10,000. If we told you in that time that the existential threat of a nuclear Iran that has kept us up at night, that I've preached about from this bema for 20 years, that'd be gone. That Israel and America would send over 12 days bombing sorties to focus on those enrichment facilities. And Israel would send sortie after sortie without losing one plane, not one fighter. Evyatar David and Emanu-El would say, come on, I've been through enough. Don't tell me stories. I don't need stories like that. But it's true. And the axis has changed. And now we're about to be on the precipice. My prediction is, and by the way, my predictions, don't go to the bank with them. But my prediction is that Azerbaijan and perhaps even Indonesia will be the next to join the Abraham Accords. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens before 2026. That's unbelievable. And Saudi Arabia, they might join. They should join. And there's no bigger gut punch to Hamas than Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. What would that say? To have a direct flight from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. That's the whole reason why October 7th happened. In some ways, it's been a time of miracle. In some ways, it has indeed changed all of these prices. What if Noah got off the boat and he saw a small village of people? A village that was high up on a mountain that survived the flood. What would he say to them happened over the last 40 days? What would they say to them happened over the last 40 days of that flood? Were they hungry? Did they see people they loved or animals that they cared about disappear? Did they see things get reborn and regenerated? Did they see the worst in humanity or the best in Mother Nature? A few years ago, my family and I went to Yellowstone National Park. And if you ever get the chance, you should go. It's an amazing place. And we learned something fascinating at Yellowstone National Park. The fascinating thing that we learned is that forest fires are good. Now, we were all taught that forest fires are terrible. And I'm not encouraging anyone to ignite a forest fire. But what they've learned in Yellowstone Park is that sometimes when there's a forest fire in a particular area, that the heat becomes so intense that there are little acorns and little nuts that explode and then become seeds and pods that allow for the soiling, the birthing, the planting of a species that hasn't been planted in hundreds of years. And the only way that seed can come out is through the devastation of fire. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. It just lives in its pod for generation after generation after generation. So the question is then asked to the guide taking us around in Yellowstone. So is the fire a good thing, or is the fire a bad thing? To which the guide says unequivocally, yes. It is a good thing, and it is a bad thing. What we saw over these 2 years was some of the very worst barbarism and inhuman nature, not only in Israel and in Gaza, but even in America and in Europe. What we have seen and felt is a rise in anti-Semitism that is nothing short of scary. But we've also been reminded and buoyed by humanity and by a God who still provides miracles. Miracles that are stronger and more potent and visible than the rainbows that shine after a 40-day flood. Miracles of Evyatar David hugging his mom and Emanu-El playing the piano again. And if you don't see that as a miracle, perhaps our eyes aren't looking towards the right rainbows. May we try and stop as many of those fires as possible. But when they happen, can we process and help till the soil that will plant new seeds of hope and opportunity, and most of all, of peace? Shabbat shalom, everyone.